And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we focus on US-Iran war and its impact on the Nigerian economy.
More than 3 weeks into the escalating conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, the global shock waves are becoming harder to ignore. And for Nigeria, the effects are already being felt.
Absolutely, Ademola. Now, from rising energy costs to pressure on household income, the impact is real. And ironically, for a country that produces crude oil, many Nigerians are asking, why does the global oil price surge still translate to higher local fuel prices?
Well, that's a big question, Victor. In recent weeks, global crude prices have spiked, at some points crossing $120 per barrel before fluctuating around the $100 mark, driven by supply disruptions and fears of escalation in the Middle East.
And here at home, the effect has been immediate. Petrol prices have climbed sharply across many parts of the country, pushing up transport costs, food prices, and overall living expenses.
The situation is further complicated by Nigeria's structural reality. We export crude, but still depend heavily on imported refined products. So, when global markets shake, the impact is felt directly.
Add to that the pressure on the naira, rising demand for foreign exchange, and the increasing cost of imports. And then you begin to see why many economists describe this as a perfect storm.
Good description there. There are also wider global concerns. Shipping routes around the Persian Gulf are under threat, and any prolonged disruption could further tighten supply and drive prices even higher.
And just days ago, President of the Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, warned that Africa could be among the hardest hit if the conflict persists, given the continent's limited capacity to absorb such external shocks.
Which brings us back home. Should Nigeria still be this vulnerable to global energy shocks, despite being a major oil producer?
And would functional local refining capacity in Warri, Port Harcourt, Kaduna, or even private refineries have made a difference at a time like this?
These are the questions we'll be asking this morning as we examine the global crisis, its local impact, and what Nigeria must do to build resilience in the face of external shocks. I am Ademola Adio. This is Good Morning Nigeria.
Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. I am Victor Azu. Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us. This is still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. To begin our conversation on the impact of Iran-US war on Nigerian economy, here is a background report put together by Joseph Osen.
On February 28, 2026, tension in the Middle East escalated dramatically as Iran came under coordinated airstrikes by the United States and Israel. The strikes targeted key Iranian leadership and nuclear facilities, following the collapse of diplomatic negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. In swift retaliation, Iran launched a series of ballistic missile attacks targeting Israel, U.S. military bases, oil depots, and critical infrastructure across the Gulf region. The conflict has since taken a dangerous turn, with Iran moving to restrict access through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global shipping route, and attacking vessels navigating the channel without clearance. The Strait of Hormuz accounts for nearly 20% of the world's oil and gas supply. Disruption in the narrow corridor has significantly reduced maritime traffic, sending shockwaves through global energy markets. Across the world, the escalating Gulf crisis is exerting pressure on financial systems, fueling fear of a global economic slowdown and even a possible recession. Barren crude oil, the global benchmark surged sharply to $106 per barrel, a more than 40% increase from $92 recorded just before the crisis. Liquefied natural gas prices have risen even more, climbing by nearly 60% since the outbreak of hostilities. According to data from global petrol prices, at least 85 countries, including Nigeria, have recorded increases in petrol prices since February 28. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization warns that the conflict could significantly slow global trade growth in 2026.
The recent rise in energy prices linked to the Middle East conflict could shave another 0.5 percentage points of off-merchandise trade volume growth this year, lowering it from 1.9 to 1.4%.
Back home, concerns are mounting over the implication for Nigeria's economy.
Africa is very busy paying debt, and putting this again on top of us is going to add a lot of hardship on people, on the governments, on the people, on everybody.
For many Nigerians, there were initial expectations that the crisis may translate into economic gains, particularly through increased oil revenue. Similarly to the windfall experienced during the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War, when Nigeria reportedly earned over $12 billion in additional revenue. With the country now refining a portion of its crude locally, there was also optimism that Nigeria will be better shielded from external shocks. However, that has not been the reality. So, why is Nigeria not reaping the expected gains from the crisis? And what measures can be put in place to cushion the impact on citizens? These are some of the key questions our guests will be addressing on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, many thanks, Joseph Hussein, for that background report. And to begin this conversation, let me begin by introducing our guests. And I start with Dr. Billy Giles Harry, who is the National President, Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria. He joins us via Zoom. Dr. Harry, a pleasure to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Good morning, and God bless Nigeria.
All right, and here in the studio, I'd like to welcome Professor Chigozie Enwere, who is a professor of international relations and strategic studies. We thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you so much.
Also joining us here, to discuss this issue, it's just a moment. Okay. Also joining us here is Dr. Aliu Ilyas, an economist. Dr. Ilyas, it's good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much. Let's begin our conversation. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Billy Harry, who is the National President, Petroleum Products Retail Outlet Owners Association of Nigeria. Dr. Harris, we know that the number one issue globally now is the US-Israel-Iran war, which is actually affecting almost all facets of our lives right now. So tell us, how is the war affecting global oil prices, and what does it mean for Nigeria?
Well, the effects are very clear. Every other day that the war rages on, it affects the trading value of the commodity that's so critical in energy production in this era, crude oil. The prices have risen and fallen and risen and fallen so sharply that rise in price, or even the fall in price for that matter, will certainly impact on Nigeria. First, it impacts on us positively that we can be able to earn additional income, and I believe that we are doing quite well in that area. It also, impacts negatively on us because it's affecting our domestic economy. The crude oil prices rising and therefore increasing cost of production of refined product is already taking its toll in Nigeria. The only refinery today that is producing PMS in commercial quantity that is serving Nigeria is the Dangote refinery, has been in a state of rising and falling of prices. So that is a critical impact on Nigeria. And it is all because the war is raging in the Gulf states and the Gulf region, the Mid-East, between these three major countries. But of course, it has also involved other Mid-East countries. So we just hope that it does not escalate and it just tries to get abated.
So Harry, we are seeing variations in pump prices. Of course, you have also alluded to this. And I'm asking, what is driving this inconsistency across different states?
You mean the price differences in different states in Nigeria?
I mean the price variation across states. What is driving the inconsistency? Why?
Be clear about what question you are asking. If I took a refined product from Lagos and I'm going to Ogun State, the cost of my logistics and all extant charges will be much lower than if I took the same product to Port Harcourt or to Maiduguri or to Sokoto. So it's very clear we do not have any mechanism now to equalize prices across Nigeria since the regulation set in fully. And the price PPRA that was responsible for that has been scrapped. So there's no price equalization, as every state is, every city is doing, prices that are commensurate to the cost of purchase and the cost of logistics plus other very credible charges that are coming across delivering 1 liter of petroleum product to anybody in this country.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Harry, for that clarification there. So let's come back to the studio right now. We'll get back to you in the course of this discussion. Prof, we're looking at these Middle East conflicts. How would you briefly frame it for Nigerians that are not really following this Middle East politics daily? How would you frame the conflicts going on?
I think the conflict in the Middle East is not a sudden occurrence, because international politics is being driven by realpolitik. And what I mean by realpolitik is that diplomacy without war is like music without instrument. And that is why every nation must be guided by this principle, because war is inevitable in the international system, and that is why nations must plan for war and the consequences of war, which we are seeing today reflecting in the energy cost.
But just a moment, Paul. But it is said that instead of going to war, why not dialogue? Because at the end of the war, you still come back to dialogue.
That's what it means. When you look at the problem in the Middle East between Iran, Israel, and US, you see that war is inevitable when diplomacy fails, when negotiation fails. They went for negotiation, and invariably, you know that in negotiation is tend towards balancing power. And because of that, there was war in the Middle East. And one thing about that war is that the war in the Middle East is not a sudden occurrence. International actors and people in that they may know that such a war will occur. And that is why in nations, you need to understand strategic planning and strategic thinking. And listen to what he's saying about the issue. When you look at the Strait of Hormuz, which is the bone of contention in this war, you see that there are 3 nations that get their oil that are involved in this. You have Iran, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Kuwait. You see that they export their oil through this strait. But also, 3 African countries get their fuel supply energy through this: Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana. But the problem is that when you do a comparative analysis of these 3 countries, you see that in Iran, the oil price did not increase. They stabilize it.
In Iran?
In Iran. Also in Turkey, they stabilize it. And you see, these are the countries that are involved in this conflict. They stabilize the oil price. But one thing in Nigeria is that another African countries, because of the fact that they see this war as a sudden occurrence without strategic planning, and that is why you see that the price of oil has increased geometrically in African countries, because of the fact that, one, African countries do not have the refineries in their country functioning. They have refineries, but it is not functioning. And that is why in international politics, what is required in diplomacy is ethical leadership and strategic foresight. For you to be able to understand that whenever war occurs in a particular state, you need to plan ahead of that particular warfare. Like in Israel, the price of oil do not increase. They have a reserve of between 2 to 4 billion liters of fuel, both for their military jets, because of the fact that they realize that in war there are speculations. What is driving the price of oil is not the actual price, but speculation. Because in every war, actors must benefit. So who are the actors benefiting in the war? That is the question that we must always ask. And invariably, you see that so many actors are benefiting in this war. And that is why we say that war is a business where actors benefit. And that is why you see that in this Strait of Hormuz that we're talking about, why is it that only African countries are affected by this geometric increase in price of crude? Like in Nigeria, it moved from 879 naira to over 1,400. That shows you that we have only one functional refinery working in Nigeria, because of the fact that Nigeria and other African countries base their politics based on ideology, driven by liberal ideology. But other countries, it is being driven by the diplomacy of blood and iron. What do I mean by blood and iron? Blood and iron means that every nation must have, the iron there means that every nation must have a solid industrial power. And 2, every nation must have a strong military. That industrial power will make nations to be able to withstand this kind of shock that is going on in the market today. It's all about speculation in the international system. And that is why I think Nigeria should go back to the drawing board. Even the actors in the oil industry. Look at Saudi Arabia. Look at our refineries in Kaduna, Warri, and Port Harcourt. Why is it that it is not working? But look at the refineries in Saudi Arabia. You see that the refinery in Saudi Arabia is owned by government in partnership with other international oil companies like ExxonMobil. Also look at Qatar. Their refinery is working. But why is it that it's owned by the government too, but in partnership with other actors? But in Nigeria, Port Harcourt refinery is not working. Warri refinery is not working. It's not effective. And that of Kaduna is not fit. What is the major problem? That is what we need to ask ourselves. Because in international politics, you need ethical leadership and strategic foresight. That is one of the key problems that is affecting
ethical leadership and strategic foresight.
I'd just like to, before I get to Dr. Elias, just a moment, please. I'd like to get to Dr. Harry again. Now, many Nigerians expect that the kind of conflict and that we have in the Middle East and then the global oil price is supposed to benefit Nigeria, right? How is it then different when it comes to the retail level for Nigerians?
Well, I think the prof there sitting right there in the studio have explained the dynamics. We need to get back to the drawing board. We need to work harder and more clearly, more focused with our economic projections. We should have been doing what the President Bola Ahmed-led government is doing in 2020 way back in the 70s, 1970s. That's when we should have done what the president is doing today. And that's why we believe that this president will set the tone to change Nigeria for the best in the future. Our refineries are not working. And we have 4 refineries owned by the state government. And Petron has called repeatedly that NNPC should get back to the drawing board. We're only hearing rhetorics and projections. NNPC should get to work. That refinery belongs to all of us, and it should work. If it's working, we may not have gotten to this point in this dark state where we are, because at least whatever production that's coming from there would have shored up the retail need in that catchment area of Kaduna that will impact the north, and then Warri that will impact the Midwest and some part of the West, and then Port Harcourt that will completely impact System 2E, that's about 13 states in the country. So the reason why it's impacting on us is simply we were not prepared. And we had a president who came in 2023 to start the process of us getting prepared. So this is a clarion call for us as a country to wake up to the realization of how we must be able to put the best effort that we have to do. So that's what it is. So there is nothing other than what the prof has explained. If we had a strategic reserve, if we had a process of making sure that all the refineries are working, our price fluctuation in Nigeria may not have been as high as it is today.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. Okay, we'll come back to this.
I saw him shaking his head, and I wanted to have your say. Global oil prices benefit Nigeria, but then at the same time, it doesn't benefit ordinary Nigerians. So what's the missing link?
Right, the missing link simply means we are not preparing for such a time. First and foremost, Nigeria should be enjoying this price of crude oil simply because we are oil producing our country. We should benefit. The more the price goes up, the more we should be celebrating. But the missing link is that the government is actually getting it, while the citizen are actually facing a very, very expensive pump price. So what is the gap? The gap simply means that the refinery that we are having in Nigeria is not sufficient enough to actually cater to what we actually need. Perhaps we are subjected to global price. If you look at those countries Prof has mentioned, even about 10 countries in Africa up to now has not even adjusted the pump price, because the NNPC and the NMDPRA are supposed to have a kind of way of actually telling them now you can actually move it, provided we have the expected reserve. I think we should start learning from force majeure and some occurrence that has happened in the past. 2008 we have oil glut. We have a financial meltdown. 2014 oil glut, COVID-19. We should know that definitely those things will likely happen. How do we make sure that we have a shock absorber that will help the economy? And how does it actually affect the economy? It affects the purchasing power of people. Virtually every goods have to pass through, transportation. And now we are having about 1,400. That simply means cost of goods and services will increase. And what will that bring? It will bring inflation. And when we have more inflation, what happens? People find it difficult to survive as it's supposed to be. So it's a serious challenge that we must find a way to actually look at it critically and plan strategically. Now, all the gains that we have had so far, in terms of macroeconomic gain, I pray if this war is not de-escalated, we might have to really have challenge in managing them. So these are the problems that we must make sure that we actually...
But isn't there room for balancing where, okay, the country is benefiting, the people are not benefiting? Isn't there room for balancing?
There's room for balancing. Are we ready to go for the balancing? The best balance would have been oil reserve. Reserve.
No, where there is no reserve.
So when there's no reserve now, the next balance should be subsidy.
All right.
That's the only thing. And the subsidy should not be the way it was done before. It could be direct to the pump price. So there's a lot of things that need strategic thinking, like the Prof said, that need to go into that, on how to actually make sure that people doesn't feel the impact. But that now, people are feeling. More so, we must also commend government, because I converted my car to CNG. Now, those that are using CNG are actually enjoying it, right? There is no increase in price because it's compressed natural gas, and we are gas country. So I think that's another thing. We must actually make sure that it's is everywhere, so people can actually take benefit of that, and people will reduce maybe possibly PMS.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elias. Prof, I mean, we've heard from you and also Dr. Elias and Dr. Harry, and the whole conclusion is that, just like you said, ethical leadership and strategic planning, which we are lacking. So if we are going to move forward now for us to be able to mitigate this effect on the ordinary Nigerian, because like he said, the gains that we already had on the macro economy could be wiped out if this thing does not de-escalate. So what's the what would you advise?
I think from you need to look at, because I look at the issues of international politics, because the variables of international politics affect domestic policies, and that is the area that Nigeria is lacking. Like, for instance, when you look at the dimensions of international politics, you see that world politics have been reconfigured. It is no longer driven by ideology and values. It is not driven by power. So Nigeria should go all out for industrialization, because nations with lower capacity of industrialization suffered under such circumstances. Like issues of ideology, you see that the problem that African countries is having is that we are driven by liberal ideology. And when you look at this concept of liberal ideology, the way it is being practiced in Africa, because you have modern liberal ideology, which is a combination of welfarism. But in Africa, our own liberal ideology is based on crude capitalism, profit maximization. And you say that let the market forces determine the price. But market forces, just like based on the principles of Adam Smith, is controlled by invisible hand. But that invisible hand can be manipulated either internationally or domestically. And when you look at the concept of liberalization of the oil industry, you see that we have succeeded in creating a monopoly where you have only one refinery working in the country. That is not liberal economy. It's a liberal economy that has brought about monopolistic tendencies in the system. And that is why the government needs to look towards the issue of competition. Competition drives the economy. And what are these competition? The oil sector, there is need to invest in the oil sector. And instead of all these oil marketers importing fuel, let them reinvest in development of domestic refineries that will drive competition in the market. And when competition is driven in the market, you see a reflection in the price of goods and services. And one lesson Nigeria should learn from this war in Iran is that before in Nigeria, they believe that there is no relationship between the cost of energy, fuel, and domestic economy. Now you have seen it, based on this, what is happening in the war in Iran today. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that there is a core relationship between the price of fuel and the well-being of Nigerians, which has been reflected in this Iranian war now, and the consequences we're facing.
Prof, you said that in Iran, the prices of the of fuel is still the same.
It's stable.
The same thing in Turkey and Israel. Are they not aligning with OPEC and all that? What about the alignment there?
You see one thing about the alignment. You see that every nation is driven by its national interest, not by global variables. And every state must have a goal. And what is the goal of every state? The goal of every state is economic stability, so that there will be a perfect relationship between the government and the people. And that is why you see that when you look at so many analysts in this Iranian-Israeli war, they say that when Israel and US attacks Iran, that the people will revolt against the system. But the people did not revolt. Why? Because the economy is stable. When you have a stable economy, and the people are not suffering, there's no much hardship, it's not driven by so-called liberal ideology that promotes.
But is the economy in Iran stable, though?
No, it's
because
not.
Some would argue that you can't revolt when bombs are flying. How are you going to? You want to die?
You see one thing about the issue of bombs. That is why I talk about the blood and iron diplomacy. You see that one thing about war is a sort of strategic principle of continuation of politics. So what is seen in Iran is a continuation of politics. What affected the Iranian economy is not this war, but sanctions placed on them by the United States. And that is what we call,
is still existing.
Yes, that is what we call hard power. Hard power involves two things: military might and coercive economic policies. These are elements of hard power, which nations use in international politics in order to increase their hegemony and control resources in the world. And that is why you see that one thing we should take away from this war in Iran is that Nigeria need to understand that most of the ideologies that we are embracing in Africa, not only Nigeria, because Nigeria and other African countries are facing similar problems. Most of the ideology that we're embracing in the world are strategically designed for underdevelopment. Most of them are strategically designed for underdevelopment.
So how do we pull off from that?
And that is why how we pull off is that we need to develop our own values, economic values. Like for instance now, based on the consequences of this war on Nigeria and other African countries, we have realized that there is need to refine our oil domestically. African countries have that tradition of supplying raw materials to the world industry without adding value. And that is the problem that we need. That is one of the lessons that we need to learn from this war. We must add value to every of our raw materials so that Africa can be able to use its economic potential to be a hegemon in world politics.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Now, Dr. Elias, we're seeing, of course, rising fuel prices, which translates to transportation costs and high cost of food prices. How does this translate into inflationary pressure?
Right. So ordinarily, when we have a high cost of fuel, it simply means that people need to buy this energy to actually service the goods and movement from one place to the other. So you recall that if we have a farm produce in Kebbi, and there isn't for it to move to Lagos, to Aba, that simply means that the oil price that you have actually incurred, you are going to translate it into what you are actually going to sell. So also if you're a service person that you need to really buy energy to service your generator and whatever, it definitely translates to that. And before you know, it actually have a multiplier effect on the day-to-day activity. So these are the major problems we must look at. Then the economy has not stand to be on its own, that it will not be actually affected. So these are the major problems we have. More so, if you look at our economy, like Prof rightly said, we enjoy sending our raw material, not building the internal power itself. A good example, you see that China said free trade, free tariff, bring your materials to China. It's a economic system to actually create subsidy for China and also reduce inflation. You also notice that we have British also saying, UK also saying that, yes, we will build port for you. You know, we'll partner you in building port. It's also for their own economic benefit. You can also remember AGOA. So all this you are seeing is to actually better their economy and not our own economy. So like Prof rightly said, Nigeria must begin to also see it from his own perspective. What do we need to stabilize our economy? What do we need to strengthen our economy? You remember that we also have the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. So trade area. All these are what Africans should work more on it to have its own independent energy that will not rely on global shock. So global shock will definitely come. How do we withstand that? It will not really affect our economy. And you also recall that we must also look at the concept of foreign exchange. what is happening now will bring volatility in the economy because it is not stable. Now we have gained some level of stability. This will definitely have its effect.
So what's the situation now with the naira and demand of forex?
Right. I think for now we are still experiencing a stable because stability. Because we have our foreign reserve. Those are the things that will actually help. Then we are enjoying balance of trade, balance of payment through even Dangote refinery. I just imagine if we do not have Dangote at this point in time, that simply means all Nigerians will be looking at the next vessel that will be coming through the Strait of Hormuz, and that would have given us a serious issue. He also rightly said that he prayed that we actually get this escalated on time so that it will not affect the economy, because he also gets his crude oil from outside, not everything that is actually inside. So these are the things, the dynamics that the government must actually start to look at on how we understand that there's some refinery coming up, but what is happening to our 3 refineries? If government cannot manage it, it should be privatized on time so that we see people that will actually come in, because you must have surplus. If you don't have surplus, it's a big issue, and that's what we're actually experiencing now.
So how vulnerable is our budget now, going by this sudden swing in the petroleum price?
Right. So if you look at the budget, the most component that is even going to be challenged is the debt part of it, component of it. Recall that about 15% is going to be used, according to the upcoming budget of 2026. The 15% is going to go for debt servicing. We are going to have 15% for recurrent. Then we are 15 trillion, so to say. Then we are looking at capital expenditure. So the major problem now is that we may have to suffer capital expenditure. Remember, debt servicing is an obligation. As at January 1, you must start paying it. Recurrent expenditure is what you must do. Even go as far as getting money from CBN to actually, ways and means to do it. But the capital expenditure that actually benefits Nigerians in terms of social infrastructure, road, education, these are the areas we must start looking at, because the components of that budget, if you look at it, we are expected to actually get some money. It's a deficit budget, of course, to get money to do it. So these are the challenges we must start looking at. I'm sure the National Assembly and the, maybe CBN and whatever, and the handlers of the budget are also seeing what is happening. So they must look at the benchmarking and other things to actually determine the budget. If not, we may not have a realistic budget with what is happening, because this is much more force major. We don't have the control.
You've talked about subsidy as a possible solution at a time like this, given that there is money coming in. But what other policy tools, whether fiscal or monetary, can be deployed, to ensure that vulnerable citizens are protected?
Right. So we have a lot of tools that we can use. I think for fiscal policy, it's a good one. Government could see it from the perspective of manufacturer. When you look at the manufacturer, the industrial sector, some of them actually have to bring a lot of things inside to actually produce, and by so doing, they are also subjected to global challenge in terms of volatility. So we can find a way to solve this problem of volatility. We call it VUCA. We have problem of VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ultimately ambiguity, because we don't know what happened next. So we must be strategic, like Prof said, to actually look at this and look at what if it's prolonged more than expected. What do we have to actually absorb the challenge? Because it's a global problem, and we are not out of the global village.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Elias. Prof, from what he said, what if this, war prolongs? Right now, Nigeria imports a lot of refined, fuel and fertilizers and all that. How exposed are we if this Gulf War logistics continue tighten further?
I think when you look at this war, you see that war is strategically planned out. First of all, ask yourself, what kind of war is in the Middle East? It's a form of limited warfare. It's not an absolute war. It's a limited warfare. And that is why both Israel and US have their strategic motive for the war. They say that this war will last between 4 weeks and 6 weeks. That is the strategic time frame for the war. And that is why we classify it as a limited warfare. And they say within these 4 to 6 weeks, they would have been able to achieve their war objective, striking 2,600 targets in Iran. And that is why you see that this fourth week of the war, you see that they are talking about negotiation. The issue of negotiation is coming up. And that is why nations must also prepare for such occurrences. For US and Israel and Iran, it's not a sudden occurrence. It has a time frame. And that is why within this time frame, but other African countries, we believe that the war is an everlasting war. It's not an everlasting war. It's a strategic warfare to achieve a strategic objective and motive for the actors involved in the war. And most of these objectives could be economy. And look at it this way.
What if the time frame is extended?
Even if it's extended, there must be a time the war must end. Because war starts, and there is a time limit for war. Because at the period, like for instance, the first week and second week of the war is what we call the stalemate stage. At that particular period, there cannot be negotiation until the actors exhaust their power capability. Now the war is gradually declining, because when you look at the strategic report that is coming out of that war, you see that both America and Israel and Iran has also achieved their strategic objective. Iran has made themselves relevant in war policy. They can be able to disrupt world economy. And that is why in this war, why the two are doing this is because when they go for negotiation, because war is an instrument of diplomacy, it's an instrument of negotiation. So that both Iran and US will not go to the negotiation table as a weak actor. And that is why African countries need to learn lessons, particularly Nigeria. And that is why you see that our economy should not be subject to the vagaries in the international market that is based on speculation. So that's, as I normally say, Nigeria need to go back to the drawing table, because future war will still come up. War is inevitable, because when you look at some concepts and principles of war, you see that the world is characterized by power seekers, and nations that fail to acquire economic power and military power will be overrun by power seekers. And that is why you see that the hardship is more in Africa than in the countries that are participating in the war. So the issue here is that Nigeria need to have their experts. We have experts in this country. They need to come together to draft a strategic plan for such occurrences in the future.
Another draft?
No.
Because Nigeria has a lot of documents.
No, I'm not saying draft. For strategic maneuver during warfare.
But should Nigeria be rethinking its foreign policy or energy diplomacy for that matter as a result of development like this?
You see one thing about Nigerian foreign policy, that's why I recommend that there is a need for Nigeria to revisit its foreign policy. First of all, what is our national interest? And you see that Nigerian foreign policy is driven by idealism and moralism. And that is why we believe that we maintain peaceful relations with our neighbor. And that is what Nigeria needs to learn from this Iran war. That is the foreign policy of Qatar. That is the foreign policy of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Oman. Is driven by moralism. Maintain a flexible relationship with your neighbor. But you see that the problem of that form of foreign policy is that the world now is driven by realpolitik. And that is why you see that 25 years ago, will Saudi Arabia believe that Iran will attack them? And that is why nations must be prepared. So that's why I'm suggesting Nigeria need to go back to the drawing table, look at our foreign policy objectives and our national interests, and try to realign it with the new occurrences or the new dynamics in the war system, which is driven by power and not by moralism.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Elias, let's come back home again now. I mean, because some people have argued that maybe the government should adjust the fuel pricing and probably reserves strategy in order to mitigate the effect of this on the citizens, or wait for clearer signals. What do you suggest?
All right. So I think at this point in time, there is no room for us to start creating reserve. It's even what we have that we're actually trying to to manage. At this point, I think Dangote needs to be supported even from government perspective as well, because the company itself is one actually bringing a lot of solutions to our problems. So they need to be supported through crude as well, because he has to also source crude. If at all we need to actually look at other rigs and look at other solutions to make sure that it's having, and there must be subsidy on that part too. There's a way you can also do subsidy from the source, that by the time Dangote refinery actually have it, by the time it is refined, the price cost of it will actually comes down. Like the Petron was actually saying, they also rely on Dangote at this point in time. They could also change the modalities, but that is that the pump price, maybe at the point at which the truck has actually arrived, that's when you create, because we must also guide against corruption at this point in time, because it's the bane of our, the major corruption we are having in the subsidy, as even before now, was that those things doesn't get to the...
And that was actually why the subsidy was removed in the first instance.
That was the excuse. So we must find a way, but because at this point in time, if we don't have surplus, government must actually come in to actually, create cushion. You could see, is Governor Sheyi Makinde saying that he's giving out 10,000. I don't know if it's for only the civil servant. And I wonder how...
Because those ones are just less than 10% of the populace in Ibadan. What about the general populace?
The entire civil servants in Nigeria, local governments, states, and federal, may not be more than 20 million. So where will the other over 100 million actually... so that's why I said it must be done from the source so that people can actually benefit this. Because if you look at it, the purchasing power is becoming more difficult. It's reducing disposable income with people,
So what targeted measures would you advise that should actually help to protect households without blowing out the deficit?
Right. So, first thing I think the government needs to do is to go back to the macroeconomy. We must not allow this volatility to actually go beyond what we actually are seeing. It has to be well managed through monetary policy and fiscal policy, because at this point in time, we are not stronger in our trade policy that much. But we must look at it that the inflation pressure, because there's nothing we can do now. The next inflation, which is for March, this is going to reflect in it, and once it reflects, it simply means it's going to affect the cost of goods and services. But we must find a way to actually maintain. We are even hoping that the NPR would have come down more from 27% now. But with the look of things now, I'm sure they want to hold it as it is for now. So those are the things, the indicators that we must start working on, so that the tools will be used to actually control the economy.
Now, beyond the high global oil prices, are there any other opportunities for Nigeria in this crisis, or is it all negative?
Right. I think the first opportunity is that we are also enjoying the high cost of crude. It's coming to us as well. We are enjoying it. The only thing that we should do is that it also creates some level of expository that Nigeria can actually take advantage. I'm sure you know that some countries are actually benefiting. If you say don't pass through Strait of Hormuz, people will look for other means. Exactly. But that should be an advantage to Nigeria as well, because we can also pass through other means that Nigeria gas will also be another solution. Because once you don't buy from those areas, the focus will come to people that also have it in abundance. So we can also take advantage of that. But in terms of economics itself, I don't think we'll have more advantage, because we are too dependent on global or global activities affect our economy to an extent.
When you speak of Nigeria can bypass the Strait of Hormuz and that's an opportunity, if that exists, why is the U.S. rather talking about lifting sanctions on Russia, even if temporarily? Lifting sanctions on Russia, lifting sanctions on Iran that is causing the issues in the Strait of Hormuz. Why is the Nigerian option not being explored?
Right. You know that America, USA in particular, are very strategic. They also make sure that their citizen doesn't really suffer most things that is actually happening. If you look at the alternative of Russia, you know, it may be just additional days, maybe 10 days different from passing through Hormuz if you have to pass through their own corridor. So America is also looking at that option so that they will not have issue. You could also, there's a threat on ground that within 48 hours that if they didn't open that, they are going to, and Iran is also saying...
That has changed. He has making it 5 days.
That's what I'm saying. So they will continue to look at what will actually benefit them. And that's why we must look at it from Nigerian perspective. What are our own comparative advantage when we have this type of a situation? We need to also prepare on how to take advantage of it so that it will not affect our economy. You know, our economy is what we are just trying to build it up with challenges that we have. But now that we have this, we must create a good shock absorber that will actually absorb this challenge. If not, it will affect our, like I said, so the next inflation report will reflect what we're actually saying.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Elias. Prof, let's look at the geopolitics and the diplomacy now. And as a non-aligned OPEC member, like some say, with U.S. and Gulf ties, what's Nigeria's diplomatic sweet spot now? Would it be to be public neutrality or quiet back channels?
Now, I think when you talk about non-aligned movement, you see that the influence of non-aligned movement in the world has gradually been reducing. And the issue about this war is all about interest, pursuit of their interest, just like Doc mentioned, pursuit of their interest in the Middle East. And one thing about U.S. is that we need to look at the kind of diplomacy that U.S. is using in the Middle East. We call it triangular diplomacy. This essence of triangular diplomacy is that so many people believe that U.S. is in enmity with Iran. But when you look at the principle of triangular diplomacy, what U.S. will do is that at the end of the day, they will still draw Iran closer to them while maintaining strategic relationship with the GCC countries and Israel. So, and that's why you see that from your own comment, you see that as the war is going on, they allow Iran to export their oil, lifting the sanction on Iranian oil. At the same time, lifting sanctions also on Russia, which people believe is the act, is a sort of Russia is a sort of opposing actor against the U.S. In international diplomacy, there is nothing like permanent friend and permanent enemy. What matters is the goal and the goal and the interest of the state. And the U.S. plays it fine using triangular diplomacy. And that's why Nigeria also need to learn these key issues. Like, for instance, when you look at our neighbor Niger Republic, we need to draw Niger Republic closer to us again, and Benin Republic. And that is why I believe that Nigeria, instead of focusing on exporting their goods or moving into European market, why can't you penetrate African markets? Because when you look at this Iranian war, most of the African countries now are looking onto Dangote refinery to get more of their energy and fuel, which means, and which will be cheaper for them. So what this means is that, not just mention the issue of subsidy. What Nigeria should be doing now is that before the war started, oil was at $70. Let them set the same price to Dangote, because this is a temporary war occurrence. This price of oil over $100. Nigeria should use it to make their profit while selling to Dangote at the initial price to maintain stability in the domestic economy, control inflation, and control the hardship of Nigerians. Like, one thing about this issue now in Nigeria, you see that when people buy a liter of fuel for 1,400, and from your analysis, say that a governor is giving them 10,000 naira. When you calculate it in terms of fuel price, it's less than 4 liters or 5 liters of fuel, which can take you nowhere. So instead of giving such incentives, why don't you bring those money together, try to establish an industry, increase the industrial base in the Nigerian economy, so that the people can benefit. Like, there's another narrative that I need Nigeria to correct based on their experiences in this Iranian war, that government has no business in business. What kind of narrative is that? Look at Saudi Arabia, the largest. Look at Saudi Arabia, the refinery in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and in Iran. Each state has a share in those refineries.
But context matters. If you have had a record of government not doing well in these businesses, I think that's where that phrase came from, that government has no business in business. So
when you talk about
LNG is there, it's a good example.
When you talk about government, Saudi Arabia, is it not part of government? Mm-hmm. Iran is not part of government. UAE is not part of government. You see that in these countries, government participate in the oil refinery in collaboration and partnership with international oil companies, and they have the largest refineries in the world operating effectively. And the effect of this war on their refinery has caused a sort of shock in the world economy. So that shows you that government need to participate in business. The problem we have in Nigeria is politicization of government businesses. We need to separate politics from business. And that is why most of the businesses that fail in Nigeria is when you make board members of a particular corporation filled with politicians that do not have that professional value to add in that particular industry. So we need to study. This war has now exposed some of the inadequacies in Nigeria. We need to study why Saudi Arabia, UAE, have the largest refinery in the world, and government is participating in that refinery.
All right.
Why is it that Nigerian government cannot
do the same?
All
right. We have a number of messages coming in. Perhaps I begin from here. And Abimbola writes, is NNPC doing well in the area of petroleum product management and distribution with the refineries not producing to meet the local needs? Why are the refineries we have not working? Well, I think part of this we have dealt with. But from AA Ghana, it says, good morning to you all. Given the ongoing Iran, US, and Israel conflict and its impact on global oil prices, inflation, and supply chains, what concrete contingency plans does the Nigerian government have to protect the economy? More importantly, how will these measures translate into real relief for ordinary Nigerians already facing hardship? Okay, and finally, this is a long one. Nigeria's economy is characterized by chronic policy inconsistency, weak institutional implementation, and a persistent orientation towards rent extraction rather than productive development. Under such conditions, external shocks, whether adverse or beneficial, fail to translate into sustainable economic outcomes. The governing elite, historically predisposed to the appropriation of oil rents, have not demonstrated the developmental discipline required to convert temporary windfalls into long-term structural transformation. He continues, accordingly, while the war may alter global market conditions, its direct developmental impact on Nigeria is attenuated. The fundamental constraint lies not in the external environment, but in the internal configuration of governance, where the absence of coherent policy and productive capacity renders both crisis and opportunities economically sterile. In summary, the Iran-US conflict affects Nigeria in theory, but in practice, its potential consequences are neutralized by a political economy defined more by elite accumulation rather than by national development. This is from Aondo Akura Kennedy Sayum, PhD. Now, maybe you want to respond quickly before we go.
Right. So I think in summary, he's talking about our weak supply chain. So supply chain is very, very key in every country, and that's what China actually affected. That's giving them hedge in every economy. So what is supply chain? It's movement of goods. How do you make sure that you make it much more easier for your citizen to actually do business? So looking at it critically, it still goes back to government and talked about how we manage our shocks, because it's as if we don't expect such. But naturally, you must expect such challenges. But the buffer that you actually created, perhaps buffer in terms of having oil, PMS reserve that could actually meet the shock. Imagine if you have some level, that can actually maintain for 3 months. I'm sure we wouldn't have faced this kind of a shock. But the challenge is that even the Dangote that we rely on, I'm sure it's only about 92% that can actually cater to. Recall that even other African countries are actually calling him. And in business, those coming from outside may even pay more compared to what the internal people will actually pay. And that's why we are suggesting the idea of government looking at its subsidy from the crude to Dangote as well. So we must make sure that the supply chain in that area is being corrected or adjusted to the benefit of Dangote so that we can actually buy it much more less. Because if it continues to rise, it will reflect on the inflationary pressure, and that will now affect more purchasing power and affect Nigerian disposable income.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Elias. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we still have more messages and questions from our viewers, which we'll read out so that our guests can respond to them. Stay with us. Stay with us. You're still on to Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And our conversation is still on the U.S.-Israel-Iran war and the implication on Nigeria's economy. We still have our guest, and we have comments and questions from our viewers, which we'll read out. We read out some before we took that short break. So let me take this once. A potential conflict. This from Mohammed Isa from Kogi State. It says a potential conflict between United States and Iran could have mixed effects on Nigeria's economy. On one hand, rising global oil prices may boost government revenue since Nigeria is a major oil exporter. In summary, will Nigeria gain more revenue from oil exports? The overall impact on citizens is likely to be negative due to rising living cost. Now, this from Alaji Garko from Karu site in Abuja. It says, good morning, Nigeria. Iran and U.S. war is having a very serious impact on Nigeria's economy. The price of oil has gone high and it affected the prices of commodities. Federal government should seize this opportunity to make sure all the refineries are functioning to avoid issues like this in future. Nandom Weir from Jos said the war should offer some economic advantages for Nigeria, primarily by increasing government revenue through higher global oil prices, leading to increased foreign exchange inflows. However, these benefits are contingent on Nigeria's ability to increase its oil production and manage the accompanying economic risk effectively. Why won't federal government reactivate the major refineries and issue numerous licenses for modular refineries in the South-South region? We should be like someone standing by a river, yet crying and dying of thirst. Thank you. God bless Nigeria. There's finally from Mr. Ovigo Ovuere from Warri. It says, at this critical time, the only way to get the pump price of petroleum products reduced is for Mr. President to direct NNPCL to sell crude to Dangote refinery at a subsidized rate. We have the largest refinery in the world right now in Lagos. Nigeria is one of the largest producers of crude oil. It is abnormal for Dangote refinery to still be buying crude from the international market at over $100 per barrel.
Dr. Han is back, by the way.
Prof.
I think the issue there, based on these questions, I think there is need to collaborate with Dangote refinery to reduce the price of fuel in the country, particularly because this problem will not last for a longer period of time. As long as this period, the war is going on in Iran, Nigeria don't need to feel the impact so negatively the way we are feeling it today. So what I suggest is that they should set crude to Dangote at a reduced price at this particular period, because it's an emergency period. And the price in oil at the international market is driven by speculation, not by reality. is by speculation, because in every war, actors must benefit. Both state and non-state actors must benefit. So as Nigeria is also driving a lot of resources from this war based on the sale of crude, Nigeria should also understand that any money realized from this should be channeled in towards improving the industrial power of Nigeria, so that such occurrences may not happen in future. Because one thing, just like I normally mention, diplomacy without conflict is like music without instrument. There must be conflict in the international system, and every nation must be prepared for it. And that is why I say that in this kind of situation now that Nigeria is passing through, there is need to reduce the level of inflation, because the cost of fuel drives inflation in Nigeria. That is the primary push factor that drives inflation in Nigeria, the cost of fuel. So Nigeria should understand it now based on this occurrence of the war in Iran. Because most analysts have been making the allusion before that the cost of fuel will not drive inflation. But now we have seen the reality that the root cause of inflation in Nigeria is the vagaries in the fuel prices.
Okay. All right, thank you, Prof. Let me get to Dr. Harry. How much of the current price pressure is linked to exchange rates, Dr. Harry, and import dependence, in your opinion?
Well, there's quite a lot of correlation in the forex needs, especially for Dangote. If Nigeria is not giving as much crude oil to Dangote refinery as required daily, and he is importing, of course, there's going to be pressure on the forex, both for him and for the country. So that, to a large extent, will impact on how the price fluctuations, will continue to rear its head. So the only way we can mitigate this in the future, because for today, I don't know where we're going to get crude oil to go give to Dangote. But clearly, this is very important that we should encourage local refiners, all local refineries, not just only Dangote, all the possibilities, what is existing and what is going to come, and be able to produce much more crude oil that is that will be needed both for export and for domestic production. That will help us quite a lot to ensure that we do not get into this type of situation in the future.
Dr. Harry, let's come back to the studio now. Dr. Elias, and let's look at policies that would directly touch, the ordinary Nigerian, like the hawkers, the transporters, and all that. Would you suggest that there'll be a temporary, transport subsidies, right now, targeted, or a targeted cash relief, like we have had in the past, or letting prices adjust and protecting jobs? What do you think will reach out, especially to maybe the hawkers on the street?
Right. So, as an economist, we actually discourage intervention that has to do with giving cash to people, because the long run, it comes to actually bring about what you want to control, like inflation. And like I said, it's like we are getting the CNG right to an extent. Like I said, what I experience now, so I choose, for the past 3 months, I choose to go for CNG compared to buying PMS. And why? It's because the queue is not there. For now, at least we are enjoying that. And that simply means it helps my purchasing power to increase. So I would like to use that model to talk to government. If government can actually make this everywhere, available and is abundant, every state, every local government.
Sorry to cut in, but the challenge we have with these CNG is that most of these commercial
yes, that's where I'm going. It has not reflected.
They are not reflected.
Yes, that's where I'm actually going.
CNG.
Yes, that's the challenge we have now. So the government should also create their own kind of, I would say task force, but a monitoring. I recall that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu actually said 10 billion for each state to buy their CNG buses. I can tell you from Kubwa to the city center, some people actually follow CNG buses. I've seen people that pay 500, down to the city center from Kuje because the CNG, converted vehicle. So this is what government should do more to make sure that it's actually reflected. You remember there was a partnership also, the federal government and National Union of Road Transport Workers, that there was a subsidy for them to actually in purchasing the cylinder and what have you. So these are what government should deepen more, because if we have deepened that more, I'm sure that it is available, the effect will not be like that's one on one hand. Then the next one is also, you have to look at cost of input. Right, cost of input will reflect in the output that people will sell. So if you can also control the cost of input, government can also look at it. What are the manufacturing sector? What are their input, and what is actually making it to be expensive? You can support them at that level so that their input will not increase at this point in time, because any input increase now is going to reflect in the cost of goods and services. So the government can develop a kind of shock and policy that will actually control that now.
Now, what can Nigerians expect realistically if this conflict drags on for longer?
Well, the joy is that we have something to fall back on, which is still Dangote. So we'll still go back to I think if governments have a kind of agreement with our external customers at this point in time to actually supply them crude, at this point in time, government should channel it as well and review it and make sure that Dangote is being supplied enough at a maybe reasonable price that can actually help to create subsidy from that source. If not, if we continue to supply outside and we are not actually, having enough at home, it's a problem. Because like Dr. Harris actually saying, do we actually have the crude to supply to Dangote as it were now? That's another question.
Why should we not have?
Yes, you don't look at it that we have the 100% actually, because there are other commitments. That's why Dangote is going outside to source for crude. It's because we cannot meet up what is actually in need of his demand. That's a challenge.
Okay. Yeah, Prof, let's look at this scenario now. De-escalation versus limited strikes versus regional spread. Which scenario hurts Nigeria most?
Now, you see that when you talk about war, you are talking about de-escalation. You see that most people talk about this escalation as if it's a new innovation. That is a part of war. There must be a period of stalemate and a period when the de-escalation will lead to mutual ceasefire. And that is the trend of every warfare. And when you look at the dynamics of this war is just more or less a limited warfare. And each of the actors have their strategic motive. And as soon as they achieve their strategic interest, which reflect the state interest, the war will gradually come to an end. And that is why you see that when you look at this issue of Strait of Hormuz, we are talking about 20% of supply to the world. What are the other 80%? That is what the world is not talking about. And that's why I say that this increase is based on speculation, because more than 80% of the oil or energy do not go through the Strait of Hormuz. And now let us look at the countries that get their oil or their energy through the Strait of Hormuz. China, I think that 8%. Then you have India, about 15% of their source from the Strait of Hormuz. Then you have Japan, about 11%.
What about South Africa?
Then South Africa, Kenya, and Ghana. These are the African countries that get this thing from the Strait of Hormuz. So, but when you look at, that's why in this kind of issue, you need to do a strategic diplomacy, which Japan has done. And you see that now, Iran is agreeing that vessels to Japan will pass through it. And why the war is going on, that's why I say that war is diplomacy. It's part of politics. Why the war is going on, every vessel that passes through the Strait of Hormuz pays a certain amount of money to the Iranian government, and they're making profit. And one other lesson I want us to realize is that when you look strategically on this issue of refineries all over the world, particularly in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and even in Britain, you see that there are key international oil companies, ExxonMobil, you have Eni, and you have Phillips 66 in Britain, and you also have Total Energy. All these companies are in Nigeria. But the issue is that why are we not making strategic partnership with them to invest in refineries? And that is why you see that we allow them in the area of exploration and retail. But in other countries, they invest in refineries. So that is what this thing should teach us. We need to Nigeria need to enter into a strategic partnership with this international oil company, the way Saudi Arabia did, the way Iran did, the way UAE did, in order to invest in the refineries instead of allowing them in the retail businesses.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Let me quickly get to Dr. Billy Harry. In your opinion, and as someone who plays in the energy sector at the level of the ordinary Nigerian, what would you advise governments to do to ease the burden on energy consumers at this time?
Well, right now, we are in this situation. There is no magic wand that can take us out in one day. So we need to look at the situation in the face and proffer solutions that should be able to give us instant answer. One of it, for me, it doesn't take so long to ship in maybe like 300 CNG daughter stations into the country, and also a few mother stations, and a few bobtails that can transport gas virtually. Petron is willing to partner with the government in providing our forecourts in most of the retail outlets that have quite a lot of space and strategically positioned to work with the government to gasify Nigeria. That is one. Because if the CNG option, the LNG option, and most of us, even in our retail outlets today, are firing our generators with LPG. So, which of course, maybe because of this, patronage on it now, even LPG is increasing. So the price of LPG is increasing so astronomically. Other than that, we think that the government can also work out a process to mitigate rising transport costs by providing some kind of palliative, not subsidy, because we need to avoid that word subsidy of any kind. Food, yes, there must be a method to make sure that Nigerians feed without any stress. And if we're making some gains on the crude oil sales, we should quickly look towards making sure our 4 refineries that are state-owned are working, improve our crude oil supply structure, look at the security and involve the local communities to make sure that there's adequate security in crude oil production, and aim for at least 4 million barrels of crude oil per day, so that we can make Nigeria a very profitable refining hub and attract a lot of investors in the refinery space. We have quite a lot of coastal line that will be useful for export refinery, campaign. I think with just these 3 decisions of one, making sure that Nigerians start to enjoy CNG gas, which is not difficult to do, like I said. Government has just given funds from what we're told to import about 10,000 conversion kits. In my opinion, it should go beyond that. We should be looking at maybe 2 million kits. And those kits should be, trained to commercial vehicles, taxis, buses, and those that will be in mass transportation. And then Petron is willing to partner with the government to give our forecourts, like I've said, and the government should invest in supporting Petron to be able to set up the daughter stations in their various refineries, and also ensure that we have mother stations of the CNG that can be able to supply us. Now, once we're able to look at this holistically and practically and declare a state of emergency on gasifying Nigeria, we should be able to get out of this. And this shouldn't take even up to 1 year to do. So this war that is raging, every other day there's a borderline. This is the dynamics. When it speaks, the entire region, catches its own cold and its own fever and its own. So we cannot depend on that. We're a country, we're sovereign, and we should be able to have our strategies of survival. Other than that, our strategic reserve for petroleum, refined petroleum products should increase state by state. Every state should have its own plan to ensure that there is a downstream energy investment profile to be able to provide refined product, whether it's gas, it's petrol, it's diesel, to that catchment area. That, I think, to a large extent, will help us to solve this problem at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ari. As we just wind up this conversation, what, Dr. Elias, what immediate signals should government look for before we have this, kind of intervention to mitigate, the effect of this on Nigerian citizens? Right.
So if you look at the last inflation report, it shows that the food component is is increasing, while the average inflation is coming down. That simply means that government should look at that area critically and make sure that there is availability and there is transportation of this item through the supply chain. I think that would have helped to actually reduce the challenge or the problem of the cost of PMS. So we need to look at that critically and make sure that it does not really find its way to affect the gain we have actually achieved in the economy. So
thank you very much. Thank you. Prof, your parting shot.
I think my parting shot here is this issue of CNG that every person is talking about. The philosophy that drives Nigeria economy is the philosophy of market forces. When 50% of Nigerians move towards CNG, the price will definitely increase. And that is why I'm suggesting that we should have alternative sources of energy at a reduced price.
All right.
And that's why I believe that through ethical leadership and strategic foresight, we can be able to overcome these challenges.
Okay. All right. Professor Chigozie Enwere, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, we appreciate your time and your contributions to the program.
Thank you so much.
Let me also thank Dr. Aliyu Elias, an economist, who also joined us on this program. We thank you very much for bringing the economic perspective. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, let me thank Dr. Billy Giles Harry, who is the National President of Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria, Petron. Thank you very much for your time and perspectives on Good Morning Nigeria. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that does it for us on Good Morning Nigeria. We thank you very much for watching. I'm Victor, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
I'm Ademola Adeoye. Do have a lovely day.